All right, so today we are going to be getting into sound deadening car doors for the sake of high performance sound systems. So first thing we're going to get into is the door panel itself. Then we're going to get into the inner door skin, and then last we are going to treat the outer door skin. In this video, I am going to try to explain every step, every method, the what's, the why's, the how's, you name it. I'm going to do my best to cover it. I'm also going to do my best to cover various situations because every vehicle is different. Much like this one, I'm already going to give you a little spoiler. This already features an inner door skin that is just pretty much one giant plastic access panel. And for those that have vehicles like that or have worked on vehicles like that, you already know that they feature a ton of three-dimensional curves and shapes and whatever, and it's very difficult to install CLD products onto them. And you don't really need to anyway, so most people kind of leave them blank, as I did in my personal vehicle and as I will in here. But I will be using past installation photos to kind of go over different options for various situations. So like I said, going to start with the door panel. I already have it pretty much off. I already have the mid-range speaker and tweeter installed into the factory location in the upper door. I do not have I do not have the new mid-bass driver installed into the door yet. That I will do after this video. So we are doing what we refer to as our stage 3 sound deadening kit for doors. We do offer this kit in our store, and we also offer more explanation on this in our ResoNix buyer's guide. You can find those in the link below. But yeah, this kit's going to include ResoNix SuperMax Mega Pro CLD squares, ResoNix Fiber Mat, Butyl Rope, CCF Strips, ResoNix Guardian, pretty much everything you really need in order to quiet down your doors to a heavy degree. So let's finish taking this door panel off and jumping right into it. All right, so we have the door panel fully removed. I'm gonna take you through the entire process that I take to make sure a door panel with a door-mounted mid-bass driver does not cause any resonance, any rattles, any buzzes, creaks, groans, you name it. I'm gonna make sure this thing is as solid as possible within reason. So step 1, which I actually already took, I already did that last night without doing it on camera, so I'm sorry about that, but I can show you some little tips and tricks about it. It's the easiest step of the whole bunch, so there's not really much to film anyway. And that step 1 is using ResoNix rope to get in between all of the little creases that the overlapping panels have. Step number 2 is going to be applying ResoNix CLD squares onto the door panel itself in all of the major areas. Step number 3 is going to be applying ResoNix Fiber Mat on top of the ResoNix CLD squares, and maybe even in some other locations. And then step 4 is using ResoNix CCF Decoupling products to treat any little tiny areas that can buzz or rattle against each other from the door panel to the inner door skin. Notably, it's usually up by the window track. So yeah, back to step 1, we took ResoNix Butyl Rope, and I used this to massage into the cracks of the overlapping panels of a door panel. So you have your main structure of the door panel, but then you can have panels like this that are hot welded on. This is one of them. This is another one right here. Thankfully, this car door panel is relatively straightforward as far as how many pieces it's made out of. That being said, this one down here is definitely a main problem. The one up top, being an owner of this exact same vehicle, I know is not a problem at all since it's elevated off the actual structure of the door panel itself. This one down here is not. This one's very flimsy, it's very thin, and it pretty much sits right on top of the main door panel structure. So I know it is a problem that I need to focus on. So what I did, take ResoNix rope, ResoNix Butyl Rope, and I lay it out, and depending on the temperature, here in New York, it is the middle of December. It's a little cold out right now. I do have the heat running in the shop right now, but it's still a little chilly in here. This is the only time and only situation where I will recommend this. I use a heat gun on a light setting to kind of just warm it up a little bit. Otherwise, the ResoNix rope stays pretty stiff and it makes this job a little bit more difficult. But I heat it up a little bit, not hot, but I just get it warm so it's a little bit looser. And then as I warm it up, I can take a piece of wax paper, you know, that you get off of the back of the CLD squares. A bunch of it also comes as, you know, random pieces in the CLD squares boxes to separate each piece. You can just take one of those, cut a little piece off, and right after I warm it up, I just, you know, use that wax paper to massage it into place and make sure I get it in between the two overlapping layers. This is going to accomplish two things. Number one, it's going to provide a very soft cushion for each layer to vibrate into. So they're no longer vibrating into each other, causing audible buzzes or rattles or distortion, you know, you name it. And number two, it also helps prevent it from buzzing and rattling and vibrating in the first place, because the butyl rope is naturally an adhesive. So as you get it into place, you know, you get it to adhere to both layers and it holds them into place. They can no longer vibrate as they once did. Even if they do vibrate a little bit and they do get to move a little bit, it still provides that cushion so they no longer create a noise against each other. So yeah, like I said, I lay out the rope, I heat it up a little bit just so it's a little bit soft. We do not want it to get really, you know, messy or nasty. I'm talking, you know, heat gun on a normal setting and only hit it for, you know, a section for maybe, you know, 5 to 10 seconds, minimal. When you heat up butyl, like an actual butyl product, you don't want to do that. You can break it down. You don't want to do that, period. Yes, it can handle it, but the more you heat it up, and I'm talking to temperatures that are well beyond what a car would see. You know, if you want to set your heat gun to 250 degrees, by all means, you know, heat it up as much as you want. It can handle that. But when you're dealing with like 600, 700, 800, or like my heat gun goes up to 1300 degrees, if I'm using that, and I do use that because I'm a little impatient, you know, I only want to keep it on it for a few seconds. We don't want to get this too hot because you can break it down into something that it's not supposed to be. So anyways, warm it up a little bit, get it nice and a little bit loose. And then from there, we can just press into it with wax paper. And, you know, it helps you massage it into place, but also does two things. The wax paper obviously prevents you from, you know, getting it stuck to your finger, but it also allows a nice clean finish on it, which doesn't really achieve anything, but it's nice to have. So yeah, that is step one. So let me take this camera off and I can show you what I did up close. All right, so we have the ResoNix Butyl Rope already installed, like I said. And just to show you one more time, you know, this is going to be, you know, two overlapping layers. And as you can see, we have the hot welds, or, you know, hot rivets or melt rivets, whatever you want to call them, right here. You know, we just lightly rolled or lightly massaged the butyl rope into the overlapping, or the crack that they create. I also have it installed right here where the door grill or the mid-base grill overlaps the door panel. Again, having this vehicle, I knew this was a problem. You do want to be careful. You do not want to get it on the actual grill itself. The last thing you want is your butyl to be like visible from the front. But yeah, you know, I lightly peeled it up and just got some in there. It's going to help adhere the two layers and prevent them from buzzing against each other. So yeah, I just have a piece of wax paper here. Like I said, what I'll do is I'll just warm it up a little bit and then take it and I'll just massage it in with my finger. And as you're massaging it, you're done. You know, the wax paper doesn't stick to it. You get a nice clean finish. You're able to put as much pressure as you want onto it without worrying about anything sticking. And we are done. You know, we could see a nice clean edge right here, a nice clean finish right here. You know, I had to put a lot of pressure here. This was a problem area. But yeah, that is pretty much it for step one. Step two is going to be the ResoNix CLD squares, or Supermax Mega Pro CLD squares on the door panel. So let's get into that. All right, Step 2 is using a constrained layer damper such as ResoNix CLD squares or Supermax Mega Pro CLD squares to treat the door panel itself for resonance. There's a couple of things to keep note of going into this. Number 1, you definitely want to focus on the important areas, which are going to be the immediate location around the speaker, number 1. Number 2 is going to be any large flat areas. Now, this door panel as a whole is pretty flat. That being said, it does feature a sort of skeleton to it that helps stabilize it. But we are going to treat it as if, as if that skeleton wasn't there. We just, again, I want to do my due diligence and make sure that there's nothing I overlooked, there's nothing I wish I did or anything of that sort. So yeah, another thing to consider is we want to keep those pieces of constrained layer damper in one large piece. The larger they are in one continuous piece, the better it performs. And I've seen even my own customers, even though I have everywhere on our website not to do this, if they have a door panel like this where it has this skeleton, I've seen people like just cut out little tiny squares and just fill all the little squares. Honestly, you would be better off just not doing anything at all, because the only thing you're doing in that case is wasting time and wasting product. Pieces that tiny do borderline nothing. Even though you're covering a given amount of like volume as a whole, it doesn't really matter because you have so many relief cuts. The product only works as one piece. So when you cut it into one little piece, each little piece isn't seeing the other one being like, oh yeah, we're working together to treat this panel. It's just the one piece, and that is all it's able to do on its own. Yeah, doing one is, doing 10 little pieces is better than one little piece, but again, like it's pretty much pointless to do a bunch of little tiny pieces. My rule of thumb is if it's less than 4 square inches, don't even bother doing it. So yeah, going into it, like I said, the area around the speaker and all of the flat areas, all of the parts that are going to resonate is what we're going to treat. Now, a little trick to make this easier for yourself. The ResoNix CLD products come with a sheet of wax paper in between each piece in the box. And the point of that is to prevent the butyl that is on the edges from sticking to the other layers. But it's also nice that you can use it to trace out the different shapes that you want, which I've already done. I'm not gonna bore you with me playing arts and crafts with some wax paper and a marker. But if we look right here, I already have this shape here. This is where, if I can figure it out, this is where the mid bass is cut out. And it is just, the entire piece that would go around here and around all the little parts. As you can see, I have cutouts. I'm not gonna go over any of these. I'm gonna stay away from all of the door clips and door hooks. This uses hooks and not clips, but effectively the same thing. I wanna stay away from any of the parts that secure the door panel to the actual inner door skin. So, I have cutouts for that. But yeah, so I would take this piece, I see, okay, this is my piece, I can draw it as draw a little bit, cut, draw a little bit, cut, and we get it, fit into shape, and then we can transfer this with a marker onto our CLD squares, cut it out appropriately, and apply it. Now, when it comes to applying it, again, you're gonna wanna use an appropriate roller. You're not going to want to use a ridged roller. The ridged rollers stretch out the aluminum of your product and also provide little reliefs for it. Long story short, it drastically reduces its effectiveness. So yeah, cut it out. You don't want to beat the hell out of it. You want to stick to as large of pieces as possible, but if it's going to be really complicated to keep, a certain area one piece, again, you can cut it. It's fine, but you want to try your best to keep them all in as large of a piece as possible. So what I'm going to do is I am going to, off camera, I'm going to just cut this piece out. We're going to apply it. We're going to roll it, move on to the next piece. All right, we have our first piece trimmed out and ready to go. Before peeling it off, you obviously want to do a little test fit, make sure there's nothing else you have to trim. Another thing to note, you do not want to do CLD over any wires just for the sake of serviceability or anything you may need to do in the future. Do not go over any wires or any clips or any screws. You know, just be mindful of any of the openings where your screw holes are, stuff like that. You want to make sure these are unobstructed by your constrained layer damper. So again, we have this cut out, we have it test fitted, it's good to go. So we are going to be very careful with it. I like to sort of lay it down into place and just kind of peel off one little area and get that into place first. And I can line this up. I don't want to put any pressure down yet, just kind of tack it in a couple of areas and then work my way around from there. All right, and I'm just making sure I'm staying around this little plastic ring that this door panel has for the mid-bass speaker. And all right, we can start getting this into place. All right, again, make sure you don't get your wires covered or your clips covered or anything like that. I'm just gonna start working my way around here and just getting it pressed down by hand. And once we get it pressed down by hand, we will then get it really pressed in with the roller. So yeah. Oh, yeah, it's part of the skeleton. All right, and we are good to go. Obviously, our shapes aren't going to be perfect unless you really try your best. They don't necessarily need to be perfect as long as they are, you know, getting the right coverage and out of the way of the service points of the door. So now we are going to take our ResoNix roller and we are going to do our best to just roll it to get, you know, perfect adhesion all the way around. Now, one thing to note about rolling your sound deadener, you do not want to put on as much pressure as you possibly can. You don't need to, but why you don't want to is the more you deform your product, the less effective it is. And we are talking obviously relatively small amounts, but you're doing this, you're doing all this labor, you might as well do it right and get the most out of what you purchased, you know, and out of your time and effort. So that's my biggest thing. You know, when I'm doing something, I want to make sure I'm not wasting my time. And one of the steps that you could take is, like I said before, not doing tiny little pieces. And number two, making sure you roll it without brutalizing it. So yeah, we're just going to use the back of it to sort of get it in the tight nooks and crannies. And yeah. All right. And that's pretty much it. There's not really anything to it besides making sure we have the right coverage and it's making good contact, you know. And to go on about, you know, not rolling it super hard, as long as it's making contact in every little area, that's it. There's no more rolling that needs to be done. The point of rolling is to just making sure, you know, there's no air bubbles. It's not to get it to stick better. As soon as it has full like coverage, like full touching everywhere it sits, that's it. It's not really pressure sensitive. You know, just a light little roll is more than enough, and it is not going to go anywhere. I promise you. All right, just getting into all these little nooks and crannies, and there's a lot of tiny ones thanks to this little skeleton thing that Volvo has going on in this door. It's actually easier with my finger in some parts, but and then I can finish it off with the little hook that's on the roller to get it in those little crannies. I'll show you in a bit. Okay. All right. And there we go. So I will show you what we did. You know what? I'm gonna leave the camera set up. I will show you what I did after I do all of the pieces. All right, so I just completed the ResoNix CLD squares installation on this door panel. As mentioned, I kept the pieces as large as possible, made sure they're adhered properly without going too crazy and ruining them and stretching them out and, you know, ripping and cutting up the aluminum. And also kept away from all of the major service points, all of the clips and hooks and access holes where screws go through to secure it. Any of the wiring is left uncovered, you know, just for future serviceability sake. So yeah, now I will show you up close what we did. All right, so looking at this up close and personal, as you can see, I covered this entire, this is the backside of the map pocket. This is usually a very resonant part of the door that needs to be treated. As mentioned before, same with around the speaker. Actually, it looks like I missed one part, which will be down this whole portion. I will do that after I finish this little walkthrough. And you know, up here was large and flat and wide open and ready to you know, be treated, and same with up here. Now in here I left it uncovered because we have a major service point, a bunch of wiring. By the time we covered, you know, this little tiny area, it just wasn't worth it. But yeah, so now I'm going to move on to step 3 right after I treat that little area over there, which is going to be ResoNix Fiber Mat. Fiber Mat, we are going to install, you know, pretty much everywhere we have the CLD, maybe even in some extra areas, you know, like definitely down in here, you know, maybe some up here, I'm not really sure yet. But one thing to note about installing ResoNix Fiber Mat or any other product like this is you want to steer clear of the securing clips. If you're blocking any of these or any of the service points, you're going to be in for a tough time, especially on a car like this where these actually aren't clips, these are hooks. So these little hooks, you know, get slid into like a little, you know, female version of it. And if you have like this area just kind of taken up, it won't be able to press on and slide down. It won't be able to slide down, like you'll be blocking it. So I leave a good amount of space around it, at least in the direction it's facing, so it has enough room to travel. So yeah, I'm going to treat, you know, this little area and then get on to the ResoNix Fiber Mat installation. All right, up next is the ResoNix Fiber Mat installation onto the door panel. Now for this particular vehicle, I am going to stick with ResoNix Fiber Mat 25. The reason for this is pretty simple. There's not a lot of clearance in most areas, especially right here in the middle. The clearance and height from the edge of the hooks down to the surface of the panel is very minimal. So the Fiber Mat 45 would just be way too thick here. But in the areas where I can, you know, actually fit it, I'm gonna double up layers. You know, there's no reason not to. You know, the more, the better when it comes to a sound absorber. So yeah, now the only real thing to note about Fiber Mat 25 is it is a very particular material. It is made out of microscopic fibers that are formed into a non-woven sheet. Now, The downsides to this are the non-woven part. It is best for acoustic performance, but it doesn't create a product that's extremely stable and durable. It's very easy to tear it apart if you're not careful with it, and if you're, just kind of being a gorilla with it. Something to keep in mind, the peel and stick adhesive that's on the back of it. It's very strong, and you have to be really careful getting your initial peel. So what I do is I take my finger and my fingernail and I just get at a corner and make sure I just carefully peel up one edge, and then I'm careful with it. A few customers have called me saying, oh, I peeled the adhesive completely off the back. It's like, no, it's you grab the adhesive and just tore at it. Let's be real for a second. Like, don't do that. Like, be a little careful. I can't believe I even really need to explain this, but again, a few people have had some problems and that I figured would have been obvious on how to sort out. But again, be very careful with the initial peel, and as you're peeling it, just make sure you're not ripping off the whole entire sheet. Another thing to keep in mind with fiber mat is the edges as you cut them. Sometimes they will seal, sometimes they won't. If they don't, do not worry, it is not a problem. They don't need to be sealed. The entire volume of the product is fully mold and mildew resistant, naturally water resistant. It's really not a problem. I have this plastered all over the website, all over the product page, and I still get people asking like, oh, the edges won't seal, what do I do? Nothing, it's fine. So yeah, we're gonna get into it. And actually, before we go into it, one more thing to keep in mind. ResoNix Fiber Mat acts as a sound absorber as well as a decoupler. Now, its first purpose is to be a sound absorber, but in these applications, we also get the benefit of it being a cushioning surface between two other surfaces to prevent them from rattling against each other. We kind of can't have the best of both, because a sound absorber will, of this type, will remain fully lofted in order to allow the microscopic fibers to vibrate as much as possible as sound energy passes through. For a decoupler to work, you need to really have it apply a little bit of pressure in order to, stabilize the panel. And that puts pressure on the product and restricts the movement of the microscopic fibers. So whether you want better sound absorption or better decoupling, you kind of have to pick where you want it to lie and how much pressure you want it to want applied to it, if you want it to act as a sound absorber or a decoupler or somewhere in the middle. It can act as both, it can act very well as both, but you do need to keep in mind, for a sound absorber, you don't want it fully compressed. As a decoupler, you don't want it fully loose and limp. So yeah, we're going to get into cutting out our pieces and applying them. All right, we are moving on to the ResoNix Fiber Mat installation on the door panel. This is going to be pretty straightforward. It's a very simple material to use and work with and to understand. But there are a few things to keep in mind. All right, we are moving on to the ResoNix Fiber Mat installation on the door panels. Now, going into this, it's pretty straightforward, but there are a few things to keep in mind. First thing to keep in mind is which thickness you should use. On this vehicle's door panel, I'm going to stick with ResoNix Fiber Mat 25, the thinner of the two. And the reason for this is pretty simple. I don't have a lot of clearance and height between the surface of the door panel and the height of the little hooks that clip this onto the door itself. So the last thing I want is Fiber Mat 45, which is much thicker, creating a ton of pressure and a ton of resistance to get the door panel on properly. So we're gonna stick with 25. Another thing that relates to is, Fiber Mat is at first a sound absorber. It also benefits as a decoupler, but its first and primary purpose is to be a sound absorber. And you can have it act as both, but you can't have it act perfectly as both. You have to kind of pick one or the other you want to be, the best at, or you can do a mix of both somewhere in the middle. And where I'm going with this is the more you compress this product behind the door panel. So let's say, again, this is a very, thin working space that I have here. Let's say I went with Fiber Mat 45 and I compressed it down, you know, very thin relative to its original size. That would reduce its sound absorption performance because it compresses the microscopic fibers, which prevents them from moving and vibrating as sound energy passes through, which allows the reduction of sound energy. It converts that sound energy into mechanical and thermal energy. So the more you compress it, the more you restrict those fibers, the less they are able to move, the less they're able to convert sound energy. So the more you compress it though, the better it stabilizes the panel and acts as a decoupler. So you kind of have to pick a perfect sound absorber, a perfect decoupler, or somewhere middle ground, you know, or anywhere in between. You're not going to have a perfect sound absorber and decoupler with Fiber Mat. It is one or the other, or again, somewhere in the middle. So yeah, the installation is really simple. You can use heavy duty scissors or insulation shears to cut it. I have some really nice ones, but frankly, you don't need anything fancy. Even some basic fabric scissors can cut it. And as you cut, depending on the scissor, you will notice the product will kind of seal itself as you cut through it. Some scissors are better at this than others. If the edges do not seal as you're cutting it, don't worry, it is okay. The volume, the entire volume of the material is perfectly water resistant, mold and mildew resistant. There's nothing you have to worry about if the edge doesn't seal. I have that mentioned all over the website, and I still to this day get emails and phone calls all the time about Fiber Mat edges not being perfectly sealed, and I have to, you know, tell them over and over, like, yeah, that's okay. It's able to handle it. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. One more thing to keep in mind is the structure of the material relative to the adhesive backing. I would say this is the only weak point of working with ResoNix Fiber Mat, if you can even consider it a weak point, because it's just the nature of the beast of what a non-woven fibrous material really is, and coupling it with a peel and stick adhesive. A non-woven fibrous mat is going to be, you know, it's not strong. You can tear it apart very easily. It's just a bunch of layers of random microscopic fibers that are all kind of just resting on each other. So it's very easy to tear apart, and the very strong peel and stick adhesive that we have for it, and the reason we have a very strong peel and stick adhesive isn't because it's very strong, it's because it's very resistant to varying temperatures. I've had a few people suggest, you know, maybe go with a weaker adhesive. The downside is usually weaker adhesives almost always do not handle a wide range of temperatures like these better, stronger acrylic-based adhesives will. So anyways, some people have mentioned they've had problems peeling the backing paper on the peel and stick adhesive. What I like to do is just use my fingernail to get one little corner started and then work my way from there. Do not just grab it and start peeling it. You know, the material will just rip apart. So again, that's not anything I can even fix about the material. It's just the way a non-woven fibrous material is. It is the nature of the beast. Without that, you don't have the excellent sound absorber that ResoNix Fiber Mat is. So anyways, we are going to get into installing it, and it's, again, really straightforward. Cut out your shapes and apply them. One thing to note, people have asked me before, oh, do you have to have as large of pieces like you do with CLD? The answer is no. At the end of the day, you know, you can do it in as small pieces as you really want. As long as you get, you know, the amount that you want, you're good to go. Sound absorption is much more simple than constrained layer damping. So yeah, let's get into it. All right, we are done with the bulk of the ResoNix Fiber Mat installation onto the door panels. Now what we're gonna do is I'm gonna take the scraps that I cut off of these pieces and just cut them into smaller pieces, and frankly just start putting them where applicable. Again, when it comes to sound absorption, the more you put in, the more you get out. All right, as you see, we have completed the ResoNix Fiber Mat installation onto the inside of the door panel. Pretty good coverage all around. Nothing really crazy about this door that we needed to keep in mind outside of staying out of the way of all of the clips or hooks that secure it to the door. And also staying away from the door mechanism, obviously the speakers, any service points, stuff like that. But yeah, now we have one last thing to do on this door panel before we can install it. And that is taking a few pieces, small pieces of ResoNix CCF 3S, the soft version, and using this to decouple and spot treat any little tiny areas. I actually only have this much because I looked over this door before and I only know of one area that really needs treatment, and that's going to be along the top of the door panel. This plastic piece that goes across the entire top does tend to rattle against the inner door skin. Again, I know this because I have the same car, but many cars have the same problem. So all I'm going to do is just cut a few different strips and just install them as needed. It's nothing crazy. So yeah, this car only requires this much, nothing crazy, but other cars may need more. It's up to you to be able to determine what your car needs, what your application needs. So what the goal is here is to prevent two hard surfaces from vibrating against each other. And these surfaces have a very tight tolerance in between them. And that's where the CCF 3S comes into play. It's very thin, as you can probably see, or you can see on the website, but it's also extremely compliant. So this can compress down to pretty much nothing. Like if two parts are, like supposed to be touching and living against each other, this foam can most likely reside there without causing any fitment issues. It is that compliant. And the adhesive is extremely strong relative to how compliant and soft this foam is. So be careful when installing it, because as soon as it sticks, that's pretty much it. It's not really going to go anywhere, and if you try to peel it up, it's probably going to rip. So be very deliberate with where you're placing this. And yeah, this is pretty much it. Last piece. And just like that, I am done with the door panel. So again, ResoNix Butyl Rope, ResoNix CLD Squares, ResoNix Fiber Mat, and ResoNix CCF 3S all create a silent door panel. There are other options out there. You can use ResoNix CCF Decoupler 7, which is the same foam as the 3S, but it's 7 millimeters thick instead of 3 millimeters thick. You can also use ResoNix CCF 3F, which is a firmer version if there's any parts that get screwed together and this just isn't going to provide enough structure for it. You could use ResoNix Fiber Mat 45 if you have more of a gap in between your inner door skin and the door panel itself. There's, endless possibilities here. One thing that I have seen lately is people asking about using hydrophobic melamine in the door panel. It's not a good product for the job. It's just too stiff of a foam. You're going to want to use our CCF Decoupler products and our Fiber Mat products for this. Leave melamine to inside the door cavity, inside enclosures, inside of kick panels, stuff like that. So yeah, let's get this installed, and that is going to complete our how to sound deaden a door video.